This series contains real stories from a poisoning outbreak, told from the perspective of an investigation unfolding in real time as we search for clues and answers. It includes severe illness and death. Some moments may be difficult to hear. The views and opinions expressed on this series represent the people speaking them, and not any organization they are affiliated with. This podcast discusses medical and food safety topics, but it is for education and storytelling only. It is not medical advice and makes no claims about the safety of any food. If you are concerned about a possible poisoning or the safety of any food, contact your local poison center for free personalized medical advice. In the U.S., that number is 1-800-222-1222.
6 people are now dead. Authorities say poisoned Tylenol capsules reached store shelves.
Dozens became ill after drinking coffee investigators believe was deliberately poisoned.
Health officials are tracking a cluster of lead poisonings linked to a popular fruit pouch sold for children. Investigators suggest the contamination may have been intentional.
A train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed overnight, forcing thousands from their homes.
Officials believe a toxic ingredient may be behind illnesses at a restaurant. Investigators are focused on a spice that should never have been in food. Experts say even a tiny amount can be fatal.
Several deaths are now being reviewed.
More than 50 people have reported symptoms. State health officials are now working to find the source.
The company is offering a $100,000 reward for information on who may have added the poison.
Authorities are calling it a poisoning.
A mass poisoning.
Another outbreak.
A poisoning outbreak.
An outbreak.
An outbreak.
An outbreak.
A mass poisoning outbreak.
Welcome back to The Morel Dilemma. In our last episode, we put the morel mushroom on trial. And after sifting through the data, the signal was hard to ignore. For the first time, the scientific literature has linked these mushrooms to death. And we may not know why yet, but it turns out it was not the only signal. Did you like morels?
France, it's not the main mushroom consumed.
What's your favorite?
Chanterelle.
That's Dr. Dominique Vaudevar.
I'm Professor Dominique Vaudevar. I'm full professor of intensive care medicine in Normandy, in France. And I am also specialist in toxicology at the Paris Poison Center, where I have worked for many years.
Dr. Vaudevar is a toxicologist who has seen firsthand what morels can do. When he got a call about a man who died after eating supermarket-bought morels, he knew something was off.
We had at the Paris Poison Center one man without medical history who developed a severe hypotonic shock with diarrhea and vomiting after the ingestion of morel.
When he first heard this case, he was surprised, just like us. And they had a very familiar question that seems to always be at the center of one of these morel poisonings.
At the beginning, we were not sure that morel could induce very severe symptoms. We thought that maybe this is the false friend.
Oh, false morel.
Yes. But we made the identification of the morel, which were in a supermarket.
They, just like us, were worried about false morels, but they actually identified it from the supermarket as a true morel. Morel mushrooms, where I live, are typically a delicacy. We forage for them and we eat them. Are they historically known to be toxic in France or anywhere?
Historically, morel is not toxic, but can induce severe digestive symptoms. A few years ago, Philippe Saviuk, a French toxicologist, published a paper where morel can induce dizziness, tremors, ataxia, headache.
Once again, the morel neurologic syndrome that Dr. Lagrange told us about. This actually seems to be better recognized in France. They published on it as recently as 2017. But since then, very little has made it into the broader medical literature about morels until the Bozeman outbreak paper. And then Dr. Vaudevar's paper followed shortly after that in 2024. So what initially prompted you to do your study?
The trigger our research was the report in MMWR.
That is CDC Morbidity Mortality Weekly. Yeah.
Because they report similar outbreak linked to morel mushroom exposure, I think in a restaurant in the Montana. And they describe very, very severe digestive symptoms with 2 fatalities.
The signal published by the CDC made it all the way to Dr. Vaudevar in France and made Dr. Vaudevar realize his one-off case of morel mushroom poisoning might not have been so isolated.
We had observed just 1 case of fatality related to morel. And when we have read the paper by the CDC, we have said, oh, maybe it's more frequent.
Suddenly, Dr. Vaudevar's unique case that he couldn't explain wasn't an isolated event.
We have performed a search in our French poison centers database from 2010 to 2020 to search severe cases of morel poisoning.
Just like in the US, where every poison center call gets logged in the National Poison Data System, France keeps its own records. And Dr. Vaudevar went digging. Of course, this made it across Dr. Ye's desk. I'm starting to think not much gets by him.
So they found 446 exposures in which morels were the only mushrooms consumed. And among those individuals, 83.6% of them developed GI symptoms. And then they also identified 8 patients who had very severe GI symptoms leading to shock, and 2 of them actually died.
8 patients who developed severe shock. That's cardiovascular collapse, and 2 of them died. This is 2 more deaths that we weren't aware of. And just how the signal from the CDC prompted France to start digging, France's signal alerted the Swiss Poison Center.
Yes, I had discussed with the author of the paper from the Swiss Poison Center, and their cases were very similar to the cases we have reported. And the particularity is very quick onset of digestive symptoms.
The Swiss Poison Center toxicologists also described very similar severe life-threatening GI illnesses. 578 people who only ate morel mushrooms. And among those people, they also found 3 cases who had severe illnesses, and 2 of them died within 24 hours after eating the meal. And in these cases, commercially purchased dried morels were eaten. They also found that the patients added the uncooked mushrooms to their dish towards the end of the cooking time. So that might have had something to do with it as well. But they had severe GI symptoms with vomiting and diarrhea between 15 minutes to 2 hours, and hypovolemic shock, loss of consciousness, cardiac dysrhythmias, gastric bleeding.
Both of the patients who died in Dr. Vaudevar's study and those who became severely ill in the Swiss study developed the same symptoms as everyone else we've heard about: severe, rapid onset, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. It seems once we attuned to the signal from the CDC, we could uncover some more signals lurking in our unanalyzed poison center data. But surely there must have been a signal earlier than this. Historically, have you been aware of any deaths from morel mushrooms other than the ones that we've heard about between your studies and the CDC study?
No and yes. Okay, because if you search on internet, morel and death, you can see some paper from a public newspaper, okay, that report one girl has died in a restaurant in Barcelona, for example, or in another country than Spain. Before the CDC study, our study, or the Swiss study, it was unknown that morel can induce severe toxicity with ICU admission or even death.
So before the CDC published their data, there were some news reports about morel toxicity. The death from a girl eating at a restaurant in Spain is the first death reported that I can find, and that was reported by the news in 2019. But let's be clear, so still relatively recent. We don't know that this was necessarily a morel death. They were dining at a restaurant in Valencia, a Michelin star restaurant. The wife developed symptoms of nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, as well as her family. and they had dined on a dish with cooked morels in it. Apparently, a number of other patrons in the restaurant also got sick. There was an investigation, but I don't know the results of it or what other people in the restaurant ate, and I have no idea if this was food poisoning from a bacteria or truly some morel toxin, even though this morel was cooked. It's all speculative, and the person's autopsy actually says the cause of death was asphyxiation, likely from choking on vomit related to the food poisoning. So it's not the same type of death we've heard about from some of these other morel cases. Either way, I guess there was some signal, though not confirmed in the media. And actually, it wasn't the first signal.
Now, there have been reports of illnesses associated specifically with morel mushrooms that are served raw. So one notable incident, which was reported in the lay press, but not the medical literature as far as I know, was a party in British Columbia in 2019 where some raw morels were served on a pasta salad and 77 people got sick. And there was also an incident at a Michelin star rated restaurant in Spain where something similar happened.
So there were a few sparse signals in the media of morel poisoning, but the scientific literature totally in the dark. And when you're making decisions for patients, that is what counts. Media reports can be just flat out wrong or speculative. We don't count on those headlines to help treat patients. We rely on data. Because as Dr. Bassett put it,
this is something that's plagued the toxicology community since existence, is that historically we used to publish all the time on associations. You know, there was a reported story of an exposure to this and this outcome, but no levels were checked, no objective data was evaluated. And I think we recognize there's a responsibility in the scientific community to be as objective and transparent when it comes to people looking through our interpretation of the evidence.
So, yeah, there was a signal here, but it was buried in places we don't usually check. But now, with data from the CDC, France, and Switzerland, the scientific community is finally pushing into the light something that has maybe circled the foraging and internet communities for years. Morels can do more than upset your stomach. They can kill. And that leaves me wondering, why?
Regarding why this phenomenon occurs, there is many hypotheses. The first one is that morel is widely consumed today. It is not so expensive, and many people can eat morel.
Raw morels also, it's very fashionable in France.
Morels are much more widely available, which means more people will have access and more people will maybe eat them without taking appropriate food safety precautions like cooking the morel. And maybe that's all we're seeing, an increase in a societal trend that has a small but measurable adverse effect that's starting to show up on the doors of the medical community. I guess that's one explanation, but there's some more ideas.
The second hypothesis may be a change in the cultivation of morel. Historically, morel was picked and then it was eaten. But now most of morels are imported from Asia, where they are extensively cultivated on artificial soils. And it has been shown that cultivated mushroom may develop some bacteria with toxin.
Dr. Vodivar is raising a pretty wild possibility, one that myself and Dr. Comstock were already considering. Modern farming might be changing our mushrooms. Not just how they taste, but how dangerous they are. A number of countries in Asia have cracked the code on cultivating morels at scale, growing them on artificial soil with custom nutrients and high-yield conditions, which might be great for business, but also might be changing the ecology of the bacteria that grow on the mushrooms. And there's precedent for that. In 2020, enoki mushrooms imported from South Korea caused a listeria outbreak across multiple U.S. states. It's never happened before. And a year later, wood ear mushrooms from China kicked off a salmonella outbreak. These are brand new mushroom pathogen mashups. So maybe some new pathogen is starting to grow on morels, though it would have to be something the CDC and FDA somehow didn't pick up. So it doesn't seem as likely. But there is a clear signal in Dr. Vodivar's data that cultivation could be a problem. Were all of your severe outcomes, were they all imported mushrooms?
3 out of 8 cases, we were sure it was imported. All the morels which were consumed in our study were not picked up.
They were not foraged. They were purchased from a store.
Yes.
Every morel in Dr. Vodivar's study was bought from a store, which these days are generally imported cultivated morels. And 3 of the samples were confirmed to be imported. Maybe cultivation didn't impact bacterial growth, but something else. It is possible that cultivation could directly impact poisons that are produced. We've already talked about the poison dart frog, which loses its poison when it's grown in captivity because it doesn't get to eat the ant in its natural habitat that produces the poison for them. But there's many other examples, like how honey from Nepal can be poisonous because the flowers in the areas contain toxins. There's even examples of regional toxin variation in mushrooms. Actually, this is a problem for the false morel. Here's Dr. Vora, our false morel expert.
What have been found, at least in historic research, is much greater concentrations of monomethylhydrazine in terms of like 5 to 6 times at certain altitudes, which is interesting. I'd say between like 3,000 and 4,000 feet.
Could the place they're being cultivated, or maybe how they're being cultivated, somehow cause the mushrooms to have gained a poisonous effect? Maybe producing a new toxin, or at least making it more concentrated? It's a fascinating theory. If artificial growing conditions somehow impacted morel toxicity, it might explain why in 2023, for the first time, we have not just 1, but 3 different scientific publications reporting severe toxicity and even death from morel mushrooms. So where exactly did those mushrooms come from in Bozeman, Montana?
These mushrooms were actually imported fresh from China. Typically in the U.S., we would think of morels as a seasonal delicacy. People go hunting for them, or foraging for them, rather. Even here in Atlanta, you can find morels right here in the middle of the city in the spring, if you're lucky. It's not something that's cultivated commercially. Now, in the U.S., there have been people who've attempted to do that. It's just, not that they can't do it, but it's hard to do it on a commercially viable scale to be profitable. But in southern China, they actually figured out how to make it commercially viable.
The Bozeman mushrooms were traced back to a commercial cultivator in China. Dr. Vodivar's cases? Store-bought morels, imported. And suddenly, this cultivation theory starts to make a lot more sense. Maybe there was always a heat labile toxin in morels, but something about modern cultivation is amplifying it, changing the biology, and its impact on us. At least for a moment, I thought I had finally started figuring something out.
Besides this case of poisoning from a restaurant, we also had a case of someone who died after eating wild morels.
Nothing can ever be simple. Wild morels causing death a week before cultivated ones. This needs exploring. Hey everybody, Ryan with a quick interruption. This series only exists because of listeners like you. There are no sponsors, institutions, or billionaires quietly bankrolling this in the background. Just a lot of time, research, and production to bring these stories to life. And there are real costs that come with that. Editing software, sound design, website hosting, podcast hosting, advertising to get the word out, and a lot more. So if you're finding value in it, there are a few ways you can support the show. The first is to go to thepoisonlab.com/support and become a supporting member for as little as $1 a month. And for that, you are going to get access to every single episode ad-free and access to amazing bonus content. You get access to all of that by becoming a supporting member. But if you want to support the show and get something a little more tangible in return, there are 2 educational projects I've built alongside this series you should check out. The first is Poisonous Fungus Among Us. This is a short, simple, rhyming book about mushroom foraging safety. It's built for kids, families, curious foragers. It's a 7-minute read. It uses real, beautiful photographs of poisonous mushrooms and delivers scientifically accurate information in a way that rhymes. You can find it on Amazon by searching Poisonous Fungus Among Us, and it's also free on Kindle Unlimited. The second project is called Gotta Pick 'em. It is a poisonous mushroom card game designed by toxicologists who treat mushroom poisoning. It's a simple, fast-paced card game, but underneath it, you're learning how different mushroom poisons work, what organs they impact, the basics about their anatomy, antidotes we use for them, and you actually don't need to know anything about mushrooms to play. You can find out way more about it at gottapick'em.com, which is the companion blog that will teach you not only how to play, but a lot more about poisonous mushrooms. So, if you want to support independent public health storytelling like this, you can find links to all of those options in the show notes. But you don't have to pay anything to support the show. Just being here or sharing this with someone who might learn from it goes a long way. So thank you for listening. Let's get back to the show. The person who you just heard was Dr. Kathy Cripps.
I am Kathy Cripps. I'm a mycologist. I recently retired from Montana State University, so I'm now Professor Emerita. And I was a mycologist at MSU for 27 years, where I taught mycology.
I wanted to talk with Dr. Cripps because she was the mycologist involved in the Bozeman, Montana outbreak, as well, as it turns out, another morel poisoning death. As a PhD in mycology, getting mixed up in mushroom poisoning does come with the territory for her, but it's not her full-time job. She was primarily an educator and a fungal researcher. What that entails, well, let's have her tell us.
Research looking at mushroom diversity in the Arctic and the Alpine. When we were studying whitebark pine, we found that certain species of mushrooms seem to be critical for the survival of the whitebark pine, certain Suillus species, which are a kind of bolete. They are actually attached to the roots of the whitebark pine and provide nitrogen to the tree. So in reforestation efforts, that might be able to help jumpstart the seedlings.
Now, I know you'd like to hear more about Arctic mushrooms and tree symbiosis, but that's not why I wanted to talk to Dr. Cripps. So I'll have to put that on pause. I reached out to her for many reasons, one of which is that she was the person who identified the morel mushrooms in the Bozeman, Montana outbreak.
They were not whole mushrooms. They just had little, what they call crumbs. But from these little pieces, I could put them under the dissecting scope and then the microscope, and I could see that they had pits and ridges, which are typical of a true morel cap. And I also recommended that they do a DNA test, which I was not capable of doing, which they did, and they were true morels.
Dr. Cripps was brought in because aside from her research, she's one of the people poison centers call in when a mushroom might be to blame for the poisoning. See, when a mushroom poisoning puts life or limb on the line, poison centers routinely partner with expert mycologists like Dr. Cripps to accurately identify the mushroom. And she was brought in for this outbreak in Montana.
I received a phone call from the Montana Health Department in Helena. And usually my calls are from the Denver Poison Center or MSU Extension. So that was surprising in itself. But the next few lines woke me up, and the caller said that they had numerous people that were ill. One was dying and one was dead. So that was a wake-up call. That's not something that's typical of a mushroom poisoning call. So it was quite shocking. We knew it was serious. At that time, they did not know if they were suspecting that morel mushrooms might be the culprit, but they did not know at that time. That's why they were contacting me to see if that was a possibility, because morel mushrooms are considered a good edible mushroom.
Right. What was your initial reaction?
Well, after the shock, I asked if they could send me a sample to verify it, and they did, and I just had little pieces, but I thought you could pretty much rule out the false morels. It was enough to tell that they were true morels. You know, I'm looking back in the literature now, and I'm wondering, because we used to have sort of this false dichotomy that true morels were edible and false morels were poisonous. And therefore, if someone got sick, there must be a false morel in there. And that was the same with this case that was a restaurant, as everyone was, there must be a false morel in there somewhere.
Right. So I had the opportunity to interview a French toxicologist who took care of a morel poisoning death. And it ended up being from a cultivated mushroom shipped from Asia and bought at a store. And this prompted them, alongside some of the newer deaths we're hearing about, to look at all their data. And they actually found that many of the people who got very sick from morels were getting cultivated mushrooms, or at least store-bought mushrooms. This kind of led us to this hypothesis that maybe it's the cultivation process that's causing issues here. Except you had a death in Montana from a foraged morel. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Yes. There was a morel case in the same month.
In the same month as this outbreak?
April 2023, in the same month. And this is why suddenly morels had my attention, because having this case of poisoning from a restaurant, we also had a case of someone who died after eating wild morels.
I saw the news story about this, and it was honestly initially kind of shocking, because I already have this sort of shocking case of this huge outbreak, and now there's another from a different source, a wild source.
From a different source. Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't appear that there's any one type that is safe.
Well, I don't know, what you can rule in or out at this point, because there could be extenuating circumstances with the cultivated morels. Maybe it's something a little bit different with those wild morels. But that case happened the same month. They were wild picked true morels, because the widow of the person who died sent me jars of the morels that they had picked. They'd picked them a year earlier and dried them and put them in the freezer. Everyone was a true morel. And the DNA said they were Morchella. There were no mistakes.
This pretty clearly obliterates our cultivation theory for why morel mushrooms might have become more toxic in recent years, since it seems that even foraged morels can cause death. And this is consistent with the FDA testing that showed there were no differences between the imported morels that were served at the Bozeman restaurant and the locally sourced morel sample they used to compare with untargeted testing. While this is useful information, sadly, it means we have another morel mushroom death on our hands. The person who passed away in this case was named Peter Dayton. And fortunately, Peter's surviving family wanted to spread awareness about the dangers of morel mushrooms and shared the story of his death publicly so we could all learn more.
I heard about this case after the fact, after we finished this investigation. Actually, I think he was on a camping trip to Utah when this happened, but he's from Montana, and he foraged the mushroom the year before in Montana, dried them himself. I don't know all the details because we were not formally investigating that case, but from what I've heard and what's been reported publicly in the news, it sounds like he was using a small gas-powered camp stove, Jetboil, and might have added the mushrooms towards the end of the cooking process.
Peter was cooking that meal for himself and a friend, and they both developed exactly what we've been seeing. rapid onset nausea and vomiting. His friend recovered. Peter tragically did not. And there are a few things about this case that really matter. First, these were foraged morels, not cultivated. Next, he had eaten these before without issue, but this time they were likely undercooked. You could argue they were old, which leaves room for bacterial contamination, but they were frozen, so that feels less likely. Taken together, this looks just like every other case we've seen. But the most important piece of this case comes from Peter's family, who made Peter's autopsy publicly available so we could all learn from it. And what stands out is what wasn't there. There was no significant damage to any other organ. The injury was entirely confined to the stomach and gastric tract. And the medical examiner described the cause of death as necrotizing gastritis, inflammation of the stomach lining so severe that the tissue itself began to die. This appears to be a toxicity focused entirely in the gastric tract, which gives us a clue about how this poison might actually work. We know that morels can cause gastric symptoms when they're undercooked, but in some cases that reaction goes beyond just irritation and turns into actual cell death. And once you reach that point, bleeding, fluid loss, and shock can follow quickly. And since this was first reported with Peter's autopsy, additional autopsies from people who died after morel ingestion have shown the same pattern. So now we have a consistent injury pattern in the people who get very sick, but it's still not clear why this only happens to some.
There's so many variables involved, different sources of the morels, the different species. Were they cultivated? Were they not? Were they cooked well enough? How many were consumed?
There are a lot of factors that play in to whether you get sick from eating a mushroom. I had brought this up with Dr. Vora as well when trying to find out why not everyone in his false morel study got sick.
Dose response, that's one clear one in terms of how much they actually consumed versus, say, another disparate case. How they were prepared, right? Like we mentioned. So, we know that gyrometrin is acid and labile. So like how were they prepared? What else they may have ingested alongside, like other mushrooms. You have possible genetic polymorphisms that have been reported on, right? In terms of the slow acylator phenotypes are more associated with neurotoxicity, whereas more of the fast acylator phenotypes are more hepatotoxicity seems to develop.
That's 6 different levers you can pull to change the outcome anytime somebody eats a mushroom. Between patient factors and mushroom factors, you can see why trying to study who gets sick would be challenging. And that's assuming the symptoms we're seeing are from the mushroom itself, which might not be the case.
Also, just in general for mushrooms, were they contaminated? Were they old? Most of the CDC, they ruled most of that out for these mushrooms. But in other cases, that's also a possibility. So there's a lot that we don't know. And I think really recording and reporting the details of all of the cases could really help. And from our side, the mycological side, we do not get the medical information.
Right.
We identify the mushroom, we look at the externals of the case, but we don't get the details of the medical side. So it's almost like the medical community needs to look at that.
There are still people out there impacted by Peter's death. I hope it's some small comfort to know that this information they've made available is incredibly valuable. It not only dispels the cultivation theory, but gives us some clue as to what the cause of toxicity is. We have 2 sources. Do we have a toxin?
No.
I think this is the big surprise for everyone. While we don't know the toxin, there are plenty of hypotheses, one of which is hemolysin, a protein that can cause destruction of red blood cells that's been found in some other mushrooms, like certain Amanita species, and even has been suggested to be in the false morel. But when Dr. Vodivar went searching for proof of this toxin in the morel, he came to different conclusions.
I believe your paper mentioned hemolysin is possibly present.
The presence of hemolysin in the morel is historically known, but when we have written the paper, there is no data on this. It is just in old textbook, not more.
So when you read about morels, you'll hear about hemolysin, but we don't know.
Yes, it is just in some old books, but we didn't find anything about a specific toxin in morel.
Circular references to nowhere on possible toxins based on largely because someone wrote it in a book once. Turns out this is a theme when it comes to the poisons people report are in morels.
Right now, we do not know the toxin that's responsible for this outbreak. Now, interestingly, one class of substances that we kept hearing from various people are hydrazines. So I'll just say in my personal life, I'm involved with a local amateur mycology group here in Atlanta, the Mushroom Club of Georgia. And when this outbreak was reported, there was a lot of chatter among amateur mushroom enthusiasts all across the country. Right? People were talking about this, and there was just so many opinions, and some people would just say things like, oh gosh, everyone knows morels contain hydrazine. This has been asserted and widely published in field guides over the years. So we tried to look into this. During this investigation, we attempted to trace back the references back as far as we could to find an original source. And we just did not find any solid evidence. In fact, we found the opposite.
And of course, the French were the ones to find it.
We know they don't have hydrazine.
They don't have hydrazine.
They don't. Because Professor Randari studied them for many years in the real morel, and he never found hydrazine in.
That was a study in 1985 by Professor Randari. And Dr. Ye came across it as well.
We found one study published in 1985 on the varying monomethyl hydrazine content in various false morel species in the genus Gyrometra. And they also tested true morels. They picked a Mortella esculenta, and they demonstrated the lack of monomethyl hydrazine in that true morel specimen that they used for comparison. People have hypothesized about it, and that has gone on to be quoted and been cited repeatedly over the years, and repeated so often that it's being taken as fact.
But we know there is no monomethyl hydrazine in these mushrooms. They even tested for it in this outbreak and didn't find it. However, that's not the only hydrazine around.
It might be helpful to step back for a moment and define what we mean by the term hydrazines. Hydrazine refers to the class of organic chemical compounds with two nitrogen atoms linked by a covalent bond attached to hydrocarbon groups. Now, hydrazines can be found in other types of mushrooms as well. There is a hydrazinic compound called agaritine, which is found in the Agaricaceae family. So this family includes species in the genus Agaricus, which includes the common white button mushrooms we get in supermarkets. And by the way, the white button mushrooms and creminis and portobellos are all the same species. They're all Agaricus bisporus. But agaritine is a water-soluble hydrazine. And some researchers have hypothesized that agaritine might have mutagenic or carcinogenic effects based on animal studies. Now, whether this is applicable to human health is unclear. Now, I know some people who avoid eating raw mushrooms from salad bars, although I won't say that there's sufficient evidence to suggest that it's bad to eat them. I will argue, though, that cooked mushrooms taste better anyway.
I'm a daily eater of Agaricus bisporus, so that's good to know.
So to be clear, I'm not saying that there cannot be any hydrazines present in any morel mushrooms. It's certainly plausible that there might be an unidentified hydrazinic compound that's present in morel mushrooms that contributes to its toxicity. So definitely more basic science research needs to be done to answer that question.
Other than ruling out monomethylhydrazine, I feel as lost as we were when we started. More research is definitely needed. I think I need to talk to the people doing that research if I want some real answers. So I went looking, and I found someone who might be able to help us.
So first step which we'll do is take that mushroom and try to extract each and every chemical out of that mushroom first.
That's Dr. Ashutosh Tripathi, and he's kind of an expert in identifying mushroom poisons.
I am founding director of Natural Product Discovery Core at the Life Sciences University at the University of Michigan, of course, where we look into potential new entities or entities which can be developed into new drug candidates, lead candidates.
Dr. Tripathi may spend his time evaluating drug targets, but it's not so different than looking for poisons. In those false morels and Mont Chavon, well, Dr. Tripathi and his team actually measured the gyromitrin content within them. In fact, he developed an entirely new way to measure gyromitrin.
And the usual way of looking into hydrazine-containing molecules or gyromitrin, which is using gas chromatography. And we thought, well, let's see if we can actually derivatize it and add a chromophore to it, right?
Did you get lost there? Don't worry. We're not talking about gyromitrin. But Dr. Tripathi has experience measuring actual poisons within mushrooms, a complex organic matrix. So I thought he might have a good perspective on why it's so hard to track down a toxin in the morel. All I've learned is a lot of mythology about morels. There's reports of hydrazines, but then there's people who've looked and they can't find them. Can you help me understand, in lay terms, what are the challenges with trying to find what the toxin is in this mushroom?
That is a great question. And think about it from a very layman perspective, right? Morels contain maybe thousands of compounds. Finding an unknown toxin is analogous to something like looking for an unknown word in a foreign language book without a dictionary.
That's a good analogy.
And that's what it is about right here. So, and without knowing what we are looking for, identification becomes extremely challenging. The toxins might be present in very small quantities, but even in small quantity, they are very potent. It's also possible that while scientists are working on extraction, it's just unstable and just breaking apart. So that puts a technological barrier there. They may be structurally unlike any known toxins in references database. So the way in which FDA and CDC work is they reference it against known toxins, right? And if a toxin is never reported, they will not be able to find it.
Well, Dr. Tripathi doesn't have me hopeful that we're going to find a specific toxin anytime soon. He is now working with people like Dr. Cripps to actually figure out what the poison is. And he has some creative solutions to get around this testing problem. After your work with mushrooms in France, it sounds like you've actually started working, and your group has started working on this very problem, the morel mushroom outbreak. And it sounds like you've run into some of the same issues. Do you have any idea what might be inside the morel? Or are you going to try to find it for us?
As we are working on it, we'll find it. As a trained scientist, I don't want to say something pre-identification.
Yeah. Conjecture.
Yes, but we are working towards it. Few analytic information which I can of course provide, and it's fresh off our just happened meeting yesterday where Phil from University of Nebraska, Lincoln, did this study where they looked into the proteomics, potential proteins which might be in there, toxic proteins, which you're talking about, hemolysis. And he did find that there are certain lectins. Lectins have been shown to cause some toxicity issues in other mushroom. And we don't think people have reported lectins in Morshella at this point in time.
Lectins are proteins that bind sugars. They're sometimes called anti-nutrients because they can interfere with absorption in the gut.
You can find them in all sorts of foods, beans, for example. And many of them are not harmful, especially after cooking. But some are extremely toxic. Toxic enough to be considered bioterror weapons, like ricin, the infamous poison found in the castor bean. And when ingested, ricin can cause a rapid onset nausea, vomiting, and bloody diarrhea. Not all that different from what we're seeing with morels. So some lectins can produce a similar syndrome, but that's as far as we can take this hypothesis, which right now is just one of many.
We also did genomic analysis. What we have found is that there are lots of peptides, small peptides which are encoded in their genome. These are called ribosomally induced peptides. And if you think about, the peptides are known to have toxic properties, snake venom, cone snail venom, all these venoms are ribosomally induced peptides. So we have seen glimpses of that in the genome.
So the genome for the morel tells us it has the ability to produce peptides that are similar to other toxic proteins. This is intriguing early data, though I doubt there's cone snail venom hiding in a morel. But it gives us leads of things that could be toxic, not what actually is. So there's another approach. Instead of starting with the chemistry and asking what's toxic, you start with what's toxic and work backwards to the chemistry.
The key for us is letting the biology guide the chemistry.
Instead of writing down every chemical and putting a star next to what looks toxic, you can actually probe to see what's toxic and then try to characterize that chemical. Dr. Tripathi's lab is working on this too. He explained the process to me, and it involves extracting every chemical from the mushroom, splitting them up into batches, and testing each batch for its ability to cause toxicity using primary cell lines. So when you throw a chemical on a couple of cells, and then you can do tests looking at biomarkers to see if the chemical poisoned the cell. And if you find one of those batches causes toxicity, you split that batch into multiple batches and repeat your tests to figure out what part caused the toxicity and keep going over and over until you land on just a few molecules that seem to be the culprit. It almost sounds like the same way we develop new drugs in a way, right? Or like,
it is same way. It is exactly same way.
That is really fascinating.
So that will be the pipeline which will be followed. And once we have identified this potentially new toxin, that becomes a standard as well now.
Yeah.
Which can be readily checked. This process needs to be performed to identify any new molecule in an untargeted manner to enable agencies like FDA, CDC to perform targeted analysis.
It's exciting to hear we might actually one day find the toxin that's responsible for this. And while finding a culprit toxin will help us understand more about this problem, it's only half the battle.
Ideally, we'd like to know what the toxins are. But the other thing besides the morel side of it, there's also the human side of it. Why some people? Why not others? Were there underlying conditions?
It's certainly something in the poisoning world worth researching.
Yes.
The less we can be in a vacuum, the more all of us understand the true scope of the problem. It has been fascinating to see how this signal from Bozeman sparked research efforts around the world. We may not have teams of scientists working around the clock on this problem, but we have a lot more than we did just a few years ago. And that gives me a lot of hope that we're going to find the toxin and understand why some people get sick while others don't. But for now, we're left with the same uncertainty they faced in Bozeman. Except for them, the questions were more urgent, and the consequences were real as people were becoming sick and dying in this mass poisoning outbreak. And in our final episode, we go back to Bozeman to see how this all came to an end. and what it means for all of us moving forward. That's next time on A Morel Dilemma. If you are finding anything in this series valuable, the best way to support the show is simple. Leave a rating, write a review, and share it with someone who should hear it. This project is completely independent. No funding, no sponsors, no institutions. Just an effort to help people understand how poisoning outbreaks are identified, investigated, and hopefully prevented. If you'd like to support the show more directly, there are 3 things you can do. Head to thepoisonlab.com/support to get access to all episodes early and ad-free, or check out our educational projects like Poisonous Fungus Among Us and the Gotta Pick'em card game. Links are in the show notes. Either way, thanks for being here and for helping share this story. Because this won't be the last outbreak, but maybe together we can recognize the next one sooner. This show is written and produced by me, Ryan Feldman. Music is from Pixabay, featuring artists Vera Miller, Driver Silver, Lexan Music, and Rocco Garibaldi. Audio production and sound design by Max McClellan, MKM Audio. This show is a production of Clinical Toxicology, LLC.
6 people are now dead.
Investigators are focused on a spice that should never have been in food.
And state health officials are now working with federal agencies